Ah, Jesus, Mary and Joseph. It's Séamus McElearney, my favorite FBI agent for today. Welcome to the show, Séamus.
It's great to be here, Patrick.
Man, we have so much in common. You're first generation, I'm first generation Irish. And my grandma used to say that all the time when she'd get upset or excited. It's like, ah, Jesus, Mary and Joseph. It was pretty funny. How about your parents? Any cool stuff like that?
Well, my parents came over from Ireland. I think my mom was 17 and my dad was 20. So when you really think about that, right? So they left their country to come over to the States at such a young age. It's such a brave thing to do, right? It's like
Oh,
unheard of,
yeah, my
just like the courage behind that, and
yeah,
just to come here with not with nothing really,
right. You know,
and just to start a life.
isn't that amazing? Like my
Yep.
mom was, I think, 12. She came over with my parents, and
Oh
my
wow.
my grandpa moved to New Jersey for a year to save up enough money to send the rest of the family over. So they were
Wow.
apart from each other for a year, and you came over on a boat. That was just the way it was done. And he lived with his uncle that was a police captain, and he got two job offers, and one was a janitor on an Indian reservation in Arizona or an elevator operator downtown Chicago. Well, as you know, us fair-skinned Irish people don't do good in Arizona, so Chicago was the natural choice. So that's how mom wound up there. Dad was 18. He sold a bull. He lived on a farm and he worked in a slaughterhouse. Ireland was a third world country back then. And he sold their bull, and that was plane fare. He actually flew,
Wow.
and it made the paper. He still has the newspaper clipping.
Well, back in the 1960s, there was a lottery to come here. So that's how my parents came here. And they came and they both resided in the South Bronx and they met in the Bronx right next to Manhattan College, a place called it was it was Gaelic Park, excuse me. And what they had there was they would have Irish dances every weekend,
Oh,
and
is that
that's where they
cool?
actually met. Yeah.
Oh, is that neat?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yep.
That is so awesome. Now, did they have any relatives in the United States when they came over?
I believe my mom had an aunt and my dad just had a friend that was a
Wow,
family friend. So again, just starting from nothing really.
that is
And
amazing to me.
I think my dad was trying to get a job with Con Ed at the time, starting, and then he eventually opened up his own type of gas station. And then my mom worked in a restaurant. So that's how they first started.
Oh, is that amazing? Wow. So
Yep,
you didn't have any law enforcement in your family then?
absolutely not. Nope.
Wow. Same with me. Yeah, the my dad wound up in Chicago and he got a job with the dairy. There was a dairy that was in Chicago, like an honest to goodness dairy in the middle of Chicago. And the Chicago PD came in, they're like looking for cops. This is in the 60s. It's like, oh, there's Jimmy O'Donnell. He's 6 foot, he's in great shape. Hey, how would you like to be a police officer? And he's like, that sounds cool. And he took the physical and he failed because when he was working in the slaughterhouse, he nearly cut his trigger finger off.
Really?
And yeah, in a bandsaw. So there was no ambulances, and the nearest hospital was like an hour, from the slaughterhouse. And he says there was only like two or three people that had a car that worked there. So he hopped in the car and he's holding his finger together, wrapped in a towel, going to the hospital, and they Frankensteined his finger back. I mean, it doesn't even look like a finger. I mean, it was some medieval stuff. So they saw that and they're like, thanks, but no thanks. You can't pull no triggers, dude. So,
Unreal.
yep. So dad wound up working in dairies all his life. So that's how that worked. So you
Nice.
grew up in the Bronx. Could you kind of give us a
Yes,
snapshot of what your childhood looked like?
sure. So I grew up in an area called 207th and Bainbridge Avenue there, and we used to be known for your schools or the churches. So the church was called St. Brendan's. As a young age, we lived in a ground floor apartment building, which I think now our apartment is a bodega, and my bedroom is probably the frozen food section. It's kind of crazy. But it was a great place to grow up because we used to come home from school and we had a park right across the street. So every day you would
Nice.
rush home, do your homework, and then just go play sports. That was the name of the game. And then even the main street there, Bainbridge, was you would play sports there. So you play off the curb with the Spalding. And back then, it's like the buses and cars would actually stop. I don't think they would stop now, but back
Probably.
then they would. You know what I mean? So that was just the way it was when you were young. And then as you start to grow up older, it's like unfortunately it was kind of a rough place to grow up where I had friends that, got stabbed, they got shot and killed, people committed suicide. I remember when we were in grade school, a girl got pregnant at a very young age or pretended that she got pregnant at like a young age. So you grew up really, really quickly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But also, the area that I grew up was a very strong Irish area. And I remember that the area that at one point in the late 80s, early 1990, like 90s, is there was so many bars there. Like every other place became a bar. So,
That's so
and then
shocking.
I
Wow.
found out, yeah, shocking, right?
Yeah.
And I found out later that, there was a lot of IRA support within the area. Not
Ah,
that I
okay.
knew that when I was young,
Right.
but later on, I found that out.
That's so funny because when we were in Chicago, yeah, I was born in Chicago on the South Side, and obviously there's a heavy, Irish influence there. And we later on moved to the suburbs because, the neighborhoods were just getting really, really bad. My dad's like, I'm done with this. So what happened was I remember we went to an outdoor mass. This is my first recollection of the IRA. We went to an outdoor mass and there's two collection plates, one for the church and one for Irish Northern Aid. And I'm just like, what
It's
is
pretty
that,
funny.
Mom? And she's like, well, that's the IRA, Patrick. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I didn't know what the IRA was.
Well,
And
right.
and I remember my parents, they had Rebel albums, and
Exactly. Yeah.
that was a big deal.
And on Sunday, there was a radio station from Fordham University, which still to this day, I think, airs. They had Irish music every Sunday, which my parents would listen to religiously
Oh
from like, I
yeah,
think at like 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. So that we used to listen to that every Sunday.
that is so
And
cool. Yeah.
and then the place that my parents met at next to Gaelic Park is they had football there. So not
Oh,
American football, Irish football. So
ooh,
every Sunday when I was young, my parents would take me there as well. So it was the big thing for the Irish community back then as well.
yeah. Wow. It's just
Yeah.
obviously I don't support the IRA now, but what brought it home to me was maybe 20 years ago, maybe a little bit less. My cousin, my sister's son, he had a daughter that was probably like 12, 13 years old, and um they participated in, I think it was called the dairy, oh, what was it? It was more or less they took in a child or a teenager from Northern Ireland, and they had to be dirt poor Catholic and from a single parent home. So, they had a daughter that was like 13, so they brought over a girl that was 13 from Northern Ireland. And my parents took us all out to eat, and my dad is like, order whatever you want. This girl was dirt poor. And she's like, can I have a steak? And he's, of course you can. So the steak comes and she's looking and it's like, and I'm sitting next to her and she's like, there's something wrong with that. I said, what's wrong? She said, it's too big. I've never seen anything like this before. She never seen like a real steak in her life.
Wow.
And we're talking and she asked me what I did for a living and her eyes got like super huge. I said, "Oh, don't worry. I'm one of the good guys. Don't worry about it." I said, "What's the police like where you live in Belfast?" And she's like, "Well, we don't have police. We have Sinn Féin. This is like during the Troubles."
Right.
And she said, "If you're Catholic and you call 999 or whatever, nobody's coming in certain neighborhoods."
Yeah.
It was the RUC was for the Protestants and Sinn Féin was for the Catholics.
Right.
So, that's it blew my mind
A
that
different world.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And I'm like, here this poor kid is just dirt poor, living the toughest life ever and doesn't know what a steak looks like. And you here in this country, you dial 911, the cavalry's coming. We're going to
Exactly.
help you. And we
Mhm.
don't ask you if you're Buddhist, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, that has nothing to do with
Yep.
the equation, but it had everything to do with the equation for her.
And that's the way it should be, right?
Yes, yes. So,
Mhm.
yeah, we grew up very, very similar. So you
Yep.
wound up
Yep.
working at your father's gas station.
Mhm.
How did that mold you for the future, do you think?
Well, my dad was very tough to work for. It didn't matter if you were family or not.
I
It's
can
like
imagine.
if
Okay, Irish, yes.
if you showed up 5 to 10 minutes, if you showed up late, regardless of the time, he would send you home. And that was just his way to make you realize to set up in place, right? And it just like you worked hard. You worked, I remember you'd have to be there before 8 o'clock. You'd work till 6 o'clock at night. So I think the work ethic that he instilled in our family was really, really high standards from the very beginning. I think that helped me throughout my career when I did go work for the FBI and after as well. So I think that was really important. And as I said, it didn't matter if you were family or not. When you worked for my dad, he was a very tough man to work for.
Yeah, I can't say enough about work ethic, and I think that's something, not to sound like a grumpy old guy or anything, but I really
Mhm.
think that's lacking, and people kind of poo-poo jobs like that in today's society. Yeah, it's unfortunate. But were you also, it's a gas station. Do you also like work on cars like mechanic?
I could get by. My brother was a mechanic, though. He's five
Okay.
years younger than me, and he started working at my dad when he was probably like five. And he actually works for the FBI too now.
Oh, that's
But
awesome.
he was like, I could pump gas, I could do the bills, I could change oil, tires, and things like that. But I wouldn't call myself a certified mechanic. I would give that to my brother.
Oh man, I tell you what, man. And that's real work, especially,
Yeah.
in the summer you're boiling, you're sweating your
Yeah,
ass off doing
exactly.
that. In the winter with all the slush and salt and
Well,
oh.
and it's like my dad's gas station was on a corner. So during the winter, you'd be working outside, and when the wind would whip around that corner, forget it. You would really. So it was the weather was tough.
Yeah, but there was no such thing as calling in sick. There was no such thing as I
Mm-mm.
don't feel like working today. My
Exact.
my
Absolutely not.
my dad never called in sick ever, and he wound up giving back all of his vacation time every year to the to the
Really.
company that he worked for. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I remember I'd go on vacation when I was a cop. The first thing I do is look at the schedule. Like, when can I take the next vacation?
And my dad had his own type of business, so he was working 7 days a week. So,
Yeah.
it was just a lot of work. But that work ethic, I think, really helped me for the rest of my career.
Yeah, whenever I feel sorry for myself, I'm like, oh, this is tough or whatever. I think about, like my pops, and I'm like, okay, stop being a wimp. It's like that's just the way it is, just yeah.
Exactly.
So how did this, why the FBI? Let's get that out of the way right away. Why not a local or like another federal job?
Well, to be honest with you, I went to school, right? My parents, as I said there before, they came here. They really didn't go to high school or to college. So all they
Yep,
could really tell you was study hard, right? So I went to college, got out of college, and because my dad helped me through college, I worked for him for 2 years just to kind of repay my debt to him. But
sure.
I really didn't know what had wanted to do. So a buddy of mine told me about a job through audit at a bank. So that's why I got into banking. And I did that for probably a couple of years, but I felt no purpose or no type of passion related to that. And then I just happened to meet an agent that worked for the FBI. And I was just fascinated by it. I really had never thought about going into law enforcement before then. And then just speaking to that agent, every day just seemed different, right? One day you could speak to a CEO, you could be doing surveillance, you could be doing an arrest. And I just became fascinated by trying to join the FBI. And at that point in time, it was the mid 19 like the 90s. So at that point in time, there was a hiring freeze. So I just decided I was going to try it, right? And constantly told, you're not going to make it. You don't have any background related to that. And I have a motto in life, which is called persistence beats resistance.
Right.
So I was just determined to try. And that time, it took probably about 2 years to get into the bureau. And I applied in like 1996, I believe, and I got accepted to go to Quantico in February of 1998. But that's the reason. Just by chance of meeting that one person, kind of changed my entire life.
I was a sergeant for 17 years, and I would tell my guys, like at roll call or whenever, is that you don't realize the impact you have on people. And more than one of my friends grew up in these neighborhoods that, are some of the worst in the country. And they said, like the neighborhood cop when they were growing up was their biggest influence. Like I said, you just never know how you're going to
Yep.
influence somebody. And I mean, it's super important. We get down on this job sometimes, and you feel like you're on a hamster wheel and you're not getting anywhere. But sometimes
Yeah.
there's byproducts that you don't even
Right.
realize, that does make a difference.
No, it's true. It's
Yeah.
true.
What was your degree in? You went to college. What was your degree?
I got a bachelor's degree in finance.
It's funny you say that because I went to college. I graduated from college in '88 after getting kicked out a couple of times. But hey, I still graduated. And there was like a career fair and there was an FBI booth. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, because my major was sociology, minor was criminal justice. And I did an internship with the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department. And that sealed the deal. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I got to be a cop. This is awesome. I would do this for free. It's so much fun. I'm like, yeah. So I go up there and I'm like, yeah, I'm interested. And they're like, what's your major? What's your degree going to be in? I said, sociology, criminal justice. Nah, no, thank you. I said, what? And they said, we're looking for accountants and we're looking for lawyers right now.
Really?
Yeah. And it's all white collar, baby. And I'm just like, that popped the balloon. I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm not going to be an FBI agent anytime soon, but whatever. But I later on when I did become a city cop, I was on a motorcycle ride and I met an FBI agent on this motorcycle ride. It was like a law enforcement thing. There was all kinds of law enforcement. And we just started shooting the shit, you know, at one of the stops. And I said, do you like your job? And he says, I do, but the moving is brutal on a family. And I could totally see that.
Yep.
That would be tough. So,
I was lucky. I did my whole career in New York.
wow, that's unheard of, isn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, usually you get
Yes, it
moved
is.
around quite a
Yep.
bit.
Yes.
We were talking
Yeah.
about our friend Jerry Williams. She's got a fantastic podcast, FBI Case
Great
Review.
podcast. Yep.
Yes. And you were on there and it was excellent. But I remember interviewing Jerry and she bounced from West Coast to East Coast to she got moved around quite a bit and that's very typical.
Yep. So when you go through the training, probably about your seventh or eighth week there, they tell you what field office you're going to go to. And if you're from New York, they tell you there's a 98% chance you're going to be sent back to New York because of the cost of living and because no one really wants to come back to New York. So I was thrilled about that because I really
Yeah.
wasn't prepared to move. So I think in my class, I think we started with 50 people and we ended with probably 37. And out of the 37, probably about seven people got sent back to New York. So I was starting to get a little scared because my last name starts with M. So I was halfway through the class and
Oh,
they
okay.
called me up there and I was like, my God, if they send me to like Utah, I'm gonna freak out here. But thankfully I got sent back to New York. So
Okay. Now you had a knee injury before you even
yes.
got into the academy. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So trying to stay in shape before I went down there, playing basketball, my knee popped out,
Oh,
and I was just determined to go down there. And I had hurt my knee when playing all sorts of sports when I was younger, and I just never got it fixed. So I went down to Quantico, and sure enough, when I was doing the fit test, even before then, what happens is you go in and you meet the fit instructor, and there's two types of instructors. There's one that likes to fight, and there's one that likes to run. So I much prefer the one that likes to fight.
yep.
And I walked in, and our instructor was probably about 320 pounds soaking wet. So I was like, oh, shit, this guy's going to want to run all the time. Sure enough, that's what he wanted to do. So during one of the first pit tests, I'm running and my knee popped out. And I was
Ooh.
like, oh, no, it's horrible. So they took me in and they were going to send me home. And I was
Oh,
just determined that I would not go home because I'm so young. I don't know, is this my last chance? Are they going to send me
right.
home and that's it?
Yeah.
So I showed them that I'll do whatever I have to do to stay here. I'll go to PT. And like, it's not like you have a lot of free time down there, but I was just determined to go to PT, which I did. And I later found out that I actually had torn my ACL. So I went through training with a torn ACL, which is unheard of, really, when you think about it, trying to run on that. And, I really didn't even get my knee fixed until 2018 when I was walking up the stairs and my MCL snapped. So when
Oh,
I went to go have a procedure on it, the doctor said to me, he goes, "Did you hurt your knee when you were younger?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You tore your ACL back then
yeah.
and you never got it fixed." So he fixed them both at the same time. It took me about a year to recover. But like when you think about it, it's like to go through training, which is, pretty intense, was kind of hard to do that. So I try to excel in other ways, such as boxing and, like just trying to grade really well on like the test there. So, but it was tough.
Yeah, I think it's the Irish in you because there's no excuses.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it's like, hey, it's Sunday morning, time to go to mass. And if you said, well,
Yeah.
I'm feeling this, that, and it's like, no, if you have a leg
Get up.
amputated, you walk on
Yep.
your stump, that's there are no
You're,
excuses.
you're raised to suck it up, right?
Yes, I
So,
remember I broke my ankle and I'm in the emergency room. It was a hairline fracture, and it's just a curtain. And the doctor and my dad are on the other side of the curtain, and it's like, okay, how is he? And it says, oh, there's a hairline fracture. It's not that bad. You know, you know, back then it wasn't even a cast. They didn't have walking boots. It was an ace bandage and some crutches. So, he opens up the curtain, and I look at my dad. I'm like, well, how does it look? He says, you're fine. Get up. Yeah, I'm like, I think I was 10 or 11. He says, you're fine. It's like the doctor's like, here's his crutches. He doesn't need crutches. So off I hobbled off
That's
with that.
insulting.
Yeah, there was no coddling at the O'Donnell home. It's like, oh
Not at
my,
all. Yeah.
no.
Well, I think that made us who we are today, right? It just
Yeah,
made us stronger. You know what I mean? So as opposed to the way some of the kids are raised now,
yeah,
you
it's
know?
funny because I was in boxing, kickboxing, taekwondo. I did all of
Mm.
that. And I remember I was one of the instructor's favorites because we would spar all the time. And he says, you know what? You're not like the best at this, but boy, you could take a hell of a punch. So I was like the human punching bag. And I'm like, hey, thanks. After three or four broken noses, it's like, oh, well, thanks. Yeah,
That's
that's
great.
great. So, so where did your interest in organized crime come from?
Well, I think just watching the movies and everything, and then starting to read books about it. And when you go through training, there's a whole section on that. So I was intrigued by it because organized crime, they're into everything, whatever way they can make money. It's not just drugs or white collar. It's whatever scam that they can actually get into. And with the Bureau, you don't have a choice. It's like they send you where they're going to send you. As I just said, they sent me to New York. So that was great, right? And then when you come to New York, with the New York office, there's a rotation they put you through. First, you go through the operations center, you go do surveillance, they put you on the applicant squad. And during that time period, which is probably about 6 months, you're trying to prove yourself, right? You're signing up for shifts for arrest, to work wires. And because, as you know, in our field, your reputation is all that you really have. So
Right.
you're trying to establish a great rep. And that's what I did. I worked around the clock. I worked nights, weekends, whatever I could possibly do. And during that time period, I was going to speak to supervisors and agents on organized crime squads just to try to learn about it and try to ingratiate myself to them.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, in December of 1998, I got drafted to go to an organized crime squad. It was just by chance. It's always the needs of the Bureau. And I was lucky enough to get sent to an organized crime squad, which was C10. At that point in time, C10 handled the Bonanno family.
Yeah, it's funny because C10, we had C codes in Milwaukee, and C10 was
Mm.
advised, which means you didn't have to write a report. So you'd go to an assignment And we'd call some squads the C10 squads. You'd have a guy with a knife sticking out of his forehead. It's like, oh, C10, he's fine. We'll just. So that's what I thought of right away. But you had this interest, and you're putting in this extra work, and you're not getting paid overtime, correct? You're salaried.
Um, right, exactly. There's overtime that's built into the salary that you get. But when you work with task forces and other police departments, they would get more money, but we would get it already up front. It's not like it's a lot of money. So when you would do an overnight shift, you're not getting more money for that. So and again, as we all know, you're not doing this job for the money, you're doing it for the mission. So
Right.
but I was just willing to do that because I just wanted to learn as much as I possibly could and just try to develop the best reputation that I could.
Nice. So one part of your book I had to chuckle at was you almost got drafted into working in Africa.
Yes. So what happened was, unfortunately, they had the bombings back then. And as a new agent, again, it's the needs of the Bureau, and a lot of people were being sent there. And it may not look like it, but I have a very restricted palate, and that comes back from my Irish roots because when I was young, my mom used to always make us sit at the dinner table and finish our food. So I'd be,
Oh yeah.
my mashed potatoes, my greens, everything, and I just
Yep.
didn't like that stuff. Even to this day, I have a very restricted palate. So I'm just trying to think, if they send me to Africa, what am I going to eat there? So and I get teased every day about this. Even my wife today still like t tries to tease me about this. And I find it funny that people are so consumed about what I eat. I don't care what people eat, but people care about what I eat. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So, but if I got sent to Africa, I would have had a tough time eating. So thankfully, I did not get sent there. But I know that that's written in the actual book because I was like, oh my God, what am I going to eat there?
Well, it's a real thing because I am the
Yeah,
same exact way. We have very bland palates, to say the least. It's
yeah.
boiled and bland.
Yeah, I'm meat and chicken. It's just straight
Yep,
like
that's
that. You
me
know what I
too.
mean? So,
Yep.
yeah.
Me- Yep. And my mom, she couldn't cook to save her life. It was like we would cringe because whatever she would cook, she'd cook it to death. It was like the most well done hunk of whateverness. And I felt like a raccoon with no like saliva glands. I'd have to have a gallon of milk in front of me to down whatever. But she could cook the hell out of mashed potatoes. Oh, she made the best mashed potatoes. Oh my
Too
gosh.
funny.
Yeah. So tell us about your first organized crime investigation.
Okay, so I get sent to C10 in December of 1998. And C10, they were responsible for the Bonanno family, but also what had happened at that particular time, I get thrown into a case involving the DeCavalcante family, which is the New Jersey family, also known as the Sixth family. How that case started was it started right before I went for training. There was two events that happened. In January of 1998, um, a couple of people decided to rob the World Trade Center, and they actually do. But
Wow.
the mistake they made is when they came out of the bank in the World Trade Center, they took their mask off. And these three people were caught really, really quickly. Two, I think, were caught that day. The third person was caught within like 2 or 3 days. He fled to New Mexico. The mastermind behind that was a guy named Ralph Guarino. Ralph Guarino saw that the walls were starting to cave in, and he calls a legendary agent named George Hanna. And George Hanna was from Brooklyn, a real street guy, and he was smart enough to basically convince Ralph to become a proactive witness. What I mean by a proactive witness is making consensual recordings on the street. So that's the beginning of the case. The second event that starts this case is the murder of a guy named Joseph Canigliaro, who was a DeCavalcante associate confined to a wheelchair related to an incident that happened in the 1970s where he was paralyzed based upon another DeCavalcante member shooting him by accident when they went to go collect loan shark money.
Oh God.
Crazy.
Okay. Yeah.
But the reason he was killed was because he basically was so extorting his own crew that his
Hmm.
own crew got so tired of him doing that they wanted to kill him, and they actually did kill him. And that happened in January 23rd of 1998. So those are the two events right before I go for training that start this investigation. And then, as I said, I go through training, I get assigned to the New York office, and I get assigned to C10. And C10, I get there in December of 1998. When you have a proactive witness, you never know where they're going to go. What George was able to do is he was able to direct Ralph into the Brooklyn faction of the DeCavalcante family. And
Mm,
that's how the New York FBI starts to investigate the Jersey family. Because everyone's probably thinking, like, how is the New York FBI
yeah.
going to investigate the family? And that's how we start to do it. And George runs Ralph proactively from January of 1998 all the way up until December of 1999. And as I said, I first get there in December of 1998. So when you have a proactive witness, there's a lot of administrative tasks that are behind that, right? We had a
Mm,
dedicated surveillance team, which is unheard of, where we had this team, SO2, led by team leader Joe Sconzo, was on Ralph almost 24/7. I think in that 2 year period, we had like 1,000 surveillance logs, photos, everything.
yeah.
George directing Ralph, I think Ralph made close to 300 recordings during that time period. So, when you listen to a recording, it could be a 6 hour recording. Trying to find that nugget of information for an
Sure.
indictment is very hard to do. You could listen to it all day. So, we had to catalog those. We had to get them into Elsher or electronic surveillance unit, make copies for the attorneys. So, there was a lot that had to be done, all while keeping Ralph safe. Because, as I said, he was the mastermind behind the robbery. Why wasn't he arrested? So we were able to keep him out on the street for almost 2 years. And then that culminates in our first arrest in December of 1999, because there started to be whispers out there as to what I just said. Why hasn't Ralph been arrested?
Right.
And they think that he was a rat and they were going to kill him. So that's how we have our first arrest.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Now, people see on TV or whatever all the cool, sexy foot chases and, breaking down doors and all that, but how many hours of you were up on their phones, obviously, with wiretaps.
Well, we're up on their phones, but the best piece of evidence we had was Ralph, because he was actually making consensual recordings with them. And
Oh,
for
okay.
trial purposes, what's great is when you have a consensual recording, a photo, and then the live person to actually say it in court.
Oh,
So
sure.
that's the formula, which is awesome. Then also being up on a wire, because when you're up on a wire, right? They don't talk as much on a wire, though you're going to get leads, right? Where there might be a meeting that they're going to have, which you can go cover. But the mob guys were pretty smart not to blatantly talk on a wire,
They would
but
probably
having
speak
a
in code too, right?
in code as well. But having a proactive witness make consensual recordings is the best evidence that you can actually have, because the bad guy doesn't know he's being recorded, and
Right.
he's going to let his guard down and he's going to say things. And
Ah,
there's all types of devices that you can use, right, to
sure.
actually do that well. So
Wow. So, I think of Omerta, and the code of not being a rat in the mob. You
right.
know, did Rico change all that, do you think?
It helped a lot. Now, even though the law came out in 1970, right? I think it was first officially used to our advantage by the government in like 1985, when Rudy Giuliani used it in the Southern District against the mob bosses. But regarding flipping, though, the first main witness to ever flip was Sammy, right? Sammy flipped in like 1991. Then after him, we had a Lucchese acting boss, Al DiArco, flipped like right after Sammy. But from 91 up until this arrest, 99, no one else really flipped. I think it was Gas Pipe tried to flip from the Lucchese family, but he lied and they didn't like use him at all. So
Okay.
from 91 to 99, no one really flipped. And then we have our arrest in December of 1999. I'm relatively new. I've only been on the job for about a year, and I'm tasked with arresting Anthony Capo. Anthony Capo was a violent DeCavalcante soldier from Staten Island. Now, again, I'm new, so I'm hoping to be on an arrest team, thinking that, okay, I'll be rear security for my own protection, but I get tasked to be the team leader to arrest him. So that's how I start to get even more involved in the actual case. And I think I was rewarded for doing all the hard work that I did behind the scenes, helping George, with the admin work, helping George direct Ralph, and I get tasked to arrest Anthony in December of 1999.
Wow. Now, in your book, you talked about, you're working all these long hours. It's like you didn't know what home was, and also your father's health was declining. And
Exactly.
so you were getting pulled in a couple of different directions. Yeah, how did you keep it together? How did you keep, your focus?
Well, as I said, I got to the squad in December of 1998. My dad was diagnosed with brain cancer in March of 99.
Ugh.
We had our first big arrest in December of 1999, where I get tasked with arresting Anthony. And it was a lot that I was trying to deal with then, right? Where my dad was, getting closer to death. Here I am being the team leader now to arrest Anthony as a violent soldier within the DeCavalcante family. So a lot to deal with. And, I think I immersed myself in work not to really deal with the reality.
Okay.
But it was a lot to deal with and just trying to keep it all together. And as I said, I arrested Anthony with Capo on December 2nd of 1999. Um, I get him to flip within probably about a week. And we can talk about that, how this all played
Yeah.
itself out. How I arrest him. First of all, when we go to arrest him, he's not there. So then we'll talk about how that plays itself out too, because they actually knew we were coming. There
Oh.
was a leak in the Southern District.
Uh,
There was an alleged court reporter that was feeding them information about the indictment. So
oh.
that could have been a real safety issue, right?
Oh,
Thankfully,
absolutely.
there was no one that got hurt, but that could have been really bad. So when I went to arrest him, he wasn't there. So his wife told me that he was at his mom's house. So all the planning that you did going into doing
Oh,
checks and making sure
yeah.
who's in the house, out the window, right? So then I go and I get to arrest him at his mom's house, and this person that I was told who was so violent and hated by law enforcement, and I'm thinking like one aspect of him when I see him, he doesn't appear that way to me. He appears to have a relationship with his family. So
Oh,
again, you have to keep your guard up. But I arrest him. We get him out of there as quick as we can. Get him in the car. He invokes his right to counsel, invokes the right to remain silent, and then the mind chess starts, right, where I start to play
sure.
to play games with him. I had done my research on him from head to toe. I knew everything about him, his history. I knew he was a diabetic as well. I made sure that I had orange juice with me just in case his blood sugar dropped. His charges at that particular time was a conspiracy to murder Charlie Majuri, who was a panel boss. Also, he was charged with mail fraud. So when he invoked his right to counsel, I wanted him to know that we had the goods on him. And I would say to him, your plan to kill Charlie Majuri was to ring his doorbell. The reason that you didn't do it was because there was a cop that was living on that block.
Mm,
And now you got to think, it's early in the morning. He doesn't know where this is like this is coming from. And this is all true. As you know, you never lie to them because if you lie to them, you're done.
right, absolutely.
So yeah, so he's looking at me and he's like, how much does this kid know? Right. And then I hit him with the mail fraud. And back then, if you remember you could rent a mailbox and it would say
Yep,
suite. So it
sure.
gave you the impression that you had this lovely high-rise type of
Right,
building.
right.
It's all just BS. So I just hit him with that. And I just gave him like food for thought, making him think that I knew a lot more than I had really known. So we developed a relationship that day. We talked sports. He liked the Cowboys. I hate the Cowboys. I'm a Steeler fan. So we bonded related to that. And then he saw how I treated his stepfather that day. So about a week later, he actually called, his lawyer called and decided he wanted to play ball, which I was totally shocked because I wasn't expecting that at all. I don't think anyone from our team was expecting him to cooperate. So that starts the process. And
No,
then one thing I do in the book is I try to explain the proper process, the Woodsec process, trial process,
yep.
things like that. And the first thing he does when he does come in to proffer it is he tells us three things. He tells us about the leak in the Southern District. He tells us about the murder of Fred Weiss, which was a guy from Staten Island who unfortunately got involved with the Gambino family related to the waste business, and he was killed. Anthony was the driver in that particular homicide. It's probably, when I try to look back on that, it was probably the most indictable mob murder ever, where at least 15 people from two different mob families have either pled guilty or have been convicted.
Wow.
The reason that he was killed was because John Gotti, someone that I was just reading about prior to joining the Bureau, was actually the person who ordered him killed. The reason that he ordered
Oh.
him killed was because he thought he was cooperating. The reason that he thought he was cooperating is because he changed lawyers. Pure
Oh.
paranoia. The guy
Wow.
was not cooperating. So
Yeah.
this guy got killed for nothing.
Now,
So he tells us about that, and then he tells us about another murder of a guy named John D'Amato, who was killed in 1991. And he tells us where they're supposed to be. Uh, they were driven upstate to Marlboro, New York, and they were allegedly put there. So when you have information like this, you have to act on it right away for fear that the mob guys might move the bodies.
sure.
So we turn around, we get a search warrant, and I don't know if you ever dug for a body before, but it's really hard to even locate a body. And this particular area was very vast. It was a recycling plant, and they had
Oh.
redid the area since the bodies were put there. So it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
So we dug there for about 3 days, no good. And then just back to my dad there that night after we finished the search, went to go see my dad, and just that Irish, my mom was basically telling us that night not to leave, and
Oh,
she
okay.
had an inkling. She's a very religious person. She just
Yeah.
told us not to leave, and sure enough, my dad passed that night. So,
Oh,
thankfully, we actually were there to see that. But
yeah.
just dealing with all that at the same time period, and this was right before it was Christmas. So my dad passed on December 17th. So we had the
Oh,
wake and the funeral right before then. And the thing
yikes.
that was weird is Anthony heard that my dad had passed away. I'm in the funeral home and he calls me to wish his condolences to me. Just seemed really
Wow.
odd because here he is saying sorry to me, and 3 days earlier I'm in a recycling plant looking for bodies that he basically had put there. Just really, really sad.
Yeah,
It was crazy.
that is something else. Now, backing up a
Yeah.
little bit, did you
Yep.
ever find that leak and did you arrest her? And
They did not arrest her, but we did arrest the person that got the information. It was a Genovese captain named Prizzi Giovanelli. He was
okay.
arrested in August of 2001 and later sentenced to 10 years. There's a bunch of trials which we'll get to, but we did arrest him and he did get sentenced to 10 years.
Why didn't she get arrested?
I think we didn't have enough
Okay.
evidence on her,
Okay,
related
gotcha.
to that.
Do you know how
Yeah,
much they
yeah.
paid her? I'm just wondering what something like that would
No,
cost. Okay,
no, because
interesting.
we could only get to the guy that got the information. We were,
Gotcha.
the bad guys from our side got the intel. They weren't getting it directly from her, so they didn't know.
So Anthony Capo, when you arrested him, about how old was he?
He was probably in his 40s, I believe.
Okay, he was a
Yeah,
diabetic, like you'd mentioned,
yeah,
and he was
yeah,
also kind of strung out. I remember from the book he was like on caffeine
yeah.
tranquilizers or something like that.
Yeah, he had done a lot of drugs at that particular time. So I think prison kind of cleaned them up as well, which was good. But yeah, he was known as a very violent person. And when I arrested him, you could tell that he had been doing a lot of drugs,
Wow.
and his diabetes had kicked in too.
Damn. Yeah, I'm sure he wasn't taking care of
Yeah,
himself, like he
no,
should,
no,
Damn.
no.
And what you see on TV and movies, there's always like a big interrogation scene where, you have the cop or the FBI agent or whoever screaming at this, the person that they're interrogating, that are in their face, blah, blah, blah. And that's one of the things that just irks the shit out of me because it's like, no, it's like absolutely not. I mean, there's a time and place for theatrics and you use it
Right.
sparingly, but you want to like, hey, I'm your best friend right now. I am what you got.
Exactly. Yep. You treat them with respect. If you go at them with that approach, it's not going to work at all. As I used to tell the people that worked for me years later, it's like don't try to be a tough guy if you're not.
Right.
because these guys are going to size you up right away. You're
Yep.
not going to scare them. So it's like if you have the goods on them, you got the goods on them. Treat them with respect, and it's all about the timing, right?
Yeah.
You know, they have to you have to give them that branch for them to try to accept it and trust you. That's the whole thing is the trust level, right? Because they're taught their entire life not to like you. They're taught their entire life that they can't trust you. So you have to show them that you're a decent person and you're going to look out for their best interest. And that's what I did the day that he was arrested as well, just trying to give him some information because he hadn't been arrested in a while as to what the next steps were. So that's a bond that you try to build with them. And as I said before, you never lie to them because once you lie to them, you're done. So if I was to give him a fact that day where that was not true, I'm done. So you just give them the facts, you treat them with respect, and then ultimately they have to make that decision.
Yeah, you don't have to
And
kiss their ass,
yeah.
but just treat them like a human being, even though they have done inhuman things, and some of them are
Mhm.
monsters, by our
Yep.
standards. But boy, if you want the end result is, you want them incarcerated, you want justice to be served. And that's not going to happen by screaming and, acting like a moron.
And it's like I don't condone any of the heinous acts that these guys have done.
Right.
Unfortunately, when mob guys create crimes, they do it together. So that's what we need. We need cooperation from these types of witnesses so that we can build cases. Because as an Irish American, I can't infiltrate the mob.
Yeah.
So it's like that's
What?
that's what we need. Yeah, I know. Shocking, shocking.
Yeah.
But but you need these guys to build cases, and that's the whole thing. And it's like there's plenty of guys that don't decide to play ball with the government, right? And
Sure.
as I said, up until that time period from 91 to 99, plenty of people did not. Like he was like the first significant witness after Sammy and Al DiArco that decided to play ball. So that's an 8 or 9 year type of time frame right there.
Yeah. So you
Oh,
got
and then
Capo.
and then
Go
and
ahead.
the thing that was weird to me too is I didn't even know what I had done. But I found out after that he was the first made member in that family's 100-year history to ever cooperate.
Wow.
So that was news to me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
So you got Capo to flip to, more or less be a rat. And
Right?
you did it by, you said, he invoked his, right to having a lawyer, to be, Fifth Amendment, the whole shooting match. But you still laid it out to him as like, okay, this is what we got you on. And I'm sure they were doing the math. Him and his attorney were doing the math. And it's like, that's pretty much the rest of my life if this all
Yeah, I
goes
think
to
he was.
fruition.
I think he was